there is a third Trump tape. There is yet another recording of Donald Trump appearing to break the law in Georgia. Here is Lawrence O'Donnell getting us started talking about this. We also have Midas Touch weighing in, and it's, of course, always a treat to hear them. Here we go.
It's going to be massive. A lot's going to come out sooner or later, and it's going to be massive. It's going to be massive. Those are the words of someone who has seen and heard and evaluated all of the evidence of Donald Trump's interference in the 2020 election in Georgia. It's going to be massive. That statement was made by one of the members of the special grand jury whose report has recommended the indictment of more than a dozen people in Georgia. And we know that number because the first member of the grand jury to be publicly interviewed, the foreperson, Emily Kors, revealed that number in interviews that she did last month. 5 other unnamed grand jurors met together in a conference room with 2 Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporters and have revealed much more that should be deeply disturbing and worrisome for Donald Trump. Prosecutors in Georgia and in New York City now appear to be in a race with history. They both appear to be on the verge of being the first prosecutor in history to bring criminal charges against a former president of the United States. No one is suggesting that the charges that could be brought in Manhattan will be massive. The current expectation in Manhattan is for a possible 2-count indictment of Donald Trump for falsifying business records and possibly violating state tax law or violating state campaign finance law.
Okay, I do want to clarify one point on this because I've heard this back and forth quite a bit. Like, which is a serious enough crime to be the crime that he gets indicted with? The theme of both of these things that I want to play for you is that it does not matter. It doesn't matter. The only question we have to ask, did he do a thing? Was that thing illegal? That's it. That is really all there is. The reality that we should be prepared for and what they're going to talk about in all kinds of detail, all of which will help you understand the coverage going forward, of which there's about to be a ton. They're going to go over the details of these. They're going to break down which is serious, which is not. But the thing that is going to happen certainly is once one person indicts, all the others will have a massive, all the other prosecutors will have a massive weight taken off their shoulders because they will no longer be the first prosecutor to indict a former president. You would think that would be the dream of all prosecutors. Ooh, I can't wait to get the biggest of fish one day. But no, it appears to be not the case. They all appear terrified, utterly terrified of the idea of doing this. So, it does not matter as far as pursuing this in a court what history is gonna say about the first. It doesn't matter if it will affect politics. It really doesn't. It just comes down to, did the guy do it? And was that thing illegal? Which can be parsed out in front of a judge. Some of these cases, and you got to brace yourself for this, it might infuriate you even. Some of these cases might not be provable in court. There might be a loophole that means Trump gets off scot-free. But The watershed moment here is that once one indictment is filed, once charges are filed, more will come. It will be easier to file the next ones and the next ones and the next ones. And one case will be in, multiple cases will be in court at the same time. So, don't be afraid. Don't think of this like any other criminal prosecution. Prosecutors believe somebody did something illegal. They make the best case they possibly can, and they take it to court. That appears to be what's happening here. And what Lawrence is now saying is that, unlike in New York, where the charges are comparatively lesser, and I did this whole this whole aside to say that's still okay. That's not a knock against New York. But unlike New York, in Georgia, where there is mounds of evidence, including this recording we just found out about, apparently it's going to be massive, the charges. Ooh, I can't wait to see it.
Such an indictment will surely be historic. It will be important. It could make Donald Trump a convicted felon. But such an indictment will not be, by any description, massive. What happens in Georgia is going to be massive, according to one of the grand jurors. The grand jurors are allowed by Georgia law to reveal everything except what was said in their deliberations among themselves. They could reveal the names of everyone they recommended for indictment, but none of the jurors have been willing to go that far. They did tell the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about some new evidence that has never been reported before, and it seems that everyone in Georgia was recording their phone calls with Donald Trump. In some states, it is against the law to record a telephone call without alerting the other party to the phone call that you are recording it. Georgia is not one of those states. And this is one of those moments where we can be grateful for Donald Trump's impermeable ignorance. And
side note, maybe let me know in the comments, how do you feel about that? I honestly am not sure how I feel about the recording of phone calls. There is maybe an assumption of privacy when you call somebody. But then again, drug dealers have classically referred to drugs as all kinds of with all kinds of nicknames over the phone because they are aware of the fact that they're not necessarily. I don't know how I feel about that. I honestly don't. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think.
Relentless stupidity, because Donald Trump picked up telephones in the White House and called Georgia, where it is perfectly legal for the recipient of his phone calls to record those phone calls.
I do know how I feel about the White House. I feel like everything the president does in their capacity as president should be recorded, and those recordings should be preserved. We should have 24 hours of recording not 24 hours. We should have a full workday of recording every single time the president clocks in. This is an employee of ours. I don't effing trust this employee. We have seen in the past that it is not a good idea to trust this employee. I want them, anything they do official, to be recorded in case this eventually goes in front of a judge. I think that we could get bipartisan support on that, and we should push for it. But it's an argument for a later time.
Without telling them. Now, we already know that resulted in what is now the most famous and notorious recorded telephone call in the history of telecommunications.
All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
That was, of course, Donald Trump's call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who testified about that call to the grand jury. The grand jurors told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about another recorded telephone call. They, quote, heard a recording of a phone call Trump placed to late Georgia House Speaker David Ralston, in which the president asked the fellow Republican to convene a special session of the legislature to overturn Democrat Joe Biden's narrow victory in Georgia. One juror said Ralston proved to be an amazing politician. The speaker basically cut the president off. He said, I will do everything in my power that I think is appropriate. He just basically took the wind out of the sails. The juror said, well, thank you, is all the president could say.
That right there, in any other era with any other president, that right there would be a conviction. I mean, that would cause in any other era, any other president, that would cause their party to abandon them in mass. That's devastating.
David Ralston did not call a special session of the legislature to overturn the election. David Ralston died in November of last year. But thanks to his recording of Donald Trump's phone call, the most important evidence that David Ralston could provide to that grand jury of Donald Trump's criminal interference in the election lives after him. Think about that. For 2 years and almost 3 months now, we have all known that Donald Trump made a phone call to Georgia's Secretary of State asking to find 11,000 votes, and that was patently illegal on its face. But only Donald Trump knew that he also made a similarly criminal phone call to Georgia's Speaker of the House of Representatives, David Ralston. And then, in November of last year, David Ralston died. And Donald Trump might have gotten a few more minutes of sleep that night thinking, that's one witness who can never testify against him. But David Ralston had the presence of mind to tape Donald Trump's phone call to him. And so now David Ralston is, in effect, testifying against Donald Trump from the grave.
Believe it or not, that testimony can be a lot more devastating than if he were alive. Testimony, that evidence, I should say, can be a lot more devastating than if the guy were alive. Simply because you can't say that he has anything to gain by it. In fact, to my knowledge, if that recording had been done, and I realize there's such a thing as fruit of the poisoned tree or whatever it is, but if that recording had been done in another state where there is no consent, or where there is rather required consent to be recorded, I think it could still be used. It's neither here nor there because it's totally, completely in the clear. Let's look at the actual article. Let's have us a gander at what they're really talking about here. Well, cripes. There we go. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Fulton County jurors heard third Trump tape. Other highlights from AGC's interview. So this is from the horse's mouth, so to speak. New witnesses. Audio of a third phone conversation between former President Donald Trump and a Georgia official. A bomb-sniffing dog. Those are among the previously undisclosed details from the Fulton County Special Grand Jury's 8-month criminal investigation that participants shared with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in an exclusive interview. Yes, we do indeed have the mic on. Oh, good. The AGC recently interviewed 5 jurors, 2 women and 3 men, who examined whether Trump or his criminal allies interfered in Georgia's 2020 elections. I think they did, but we'll find out in a court of law. They agreed to share their experience, says, on the condition of anonymity, since many feared for their safety and privacy. Just want to remind you, it's not nothing that people in the trial of a president, theoretically, are afraid for their safety. That should tell you a hell of a lot about the character of the person on trial. Let me put it like this. If Jimmy Carter was on trial, you think anybody would be afraid for their safety? If Obama, if Biden, if Bill Clinton, if any of them were on trial, you think anybody would be afraid for their safety? Bush? I don't like Bush, but do you think anybody would be afraid for their safety? I don't. Their comments came weeks after Emily Coors, the jury forewoman, made national headlines for her forthcoming interviews about the group's work. Coors was not among the jurors interviewed for this story, though the participants largely corroborated details Coors shared with the AGC and other media outlets. All right, so let's look at just their summary here. The Ralston tape. Jurors confirmed that they heard audio from a recorded phone conversation between Trump and late Georgia House Speaker David Ralston. Ralston had previously told a North Georgia media outlet that he was contacted by Trump and his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Okay, remember, we're expecting to see Rudy in court on charges as well in December 2020, but the existence of a tape had not been previously known. Jurors said that during the conversation, the president asked Ralston to convene a special session of the legislature to overturn Democrat Joe Biden's narrow victory in Georgia. The speaker basically cut the president off. One juror recalled, he said, "I'll do everything in my power that I think is appropriate." All right, the Perdue testimony. And that's what Lawrence O'Donnell went over. The Perdue testimony. The jurors said they heard testimony from former U.S. Senator David Perdue, God help us, a close Trump ally who lost his reelection, thank God, bid to Democrat John Ossoff in January 2021. Perdue was questioned about a meeting at Truist Park in December 2020, during which he urged Governor Brian Kemp to convene a special legislative session, a juror said. Perdue, I'm expecting then, to be charged as well. Perdue did not respond to a request for comment. Jurors also said they spoke with Perdue's colleague, former Republican U.S. Senator Kelly Loeffler. Possible charges for Loeffler. Flynn security. This is going to be huge. Law enforcement was worried enough about the crowd Michael Flynn, Trump's one-time national security advisor, and also a man who needed to get a pardon from Trump to avoid prison, associated with that it dispatched additional lawyers for security ahead of his testimony. So let me just restate that. Law enforcement was worried about, or say that again, law enforcement was worried enough about the crowd Michael Flynn associated with that it dispatched additional layers of security ahead of his testimony. They were concerned about the crowd Michael Flynn is running with, a former general, and they think they need extra security because of him. This is serious, folks. These people need to be in prison if we can prove in a court of law that they did what it looks like they did. Officers had a bomb-sniffing German Shepherd inspect the grand jury room because right-wing terrorism is a thing, folks, a precaution they hadn't used for any other witness. Meanwhile, sheriff's deputies and marshals carrying automatic weapons were stationed outside the courthouse. Specifically, law enforcement was concerned about who might turn up to support Flynn, a prominent figure among the far-right conspiracy theorists and Christian national groups. No bomb was found, and there were no known incidents involving Flynn supporters, thankfully. Flynn refused to answer most of the questions posed by prosecutors, asserting his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, jurors said. So Flynn hangs with a crowd that gets the court so concerned about court security that they got people with assault rifles stationed, ready to rumble. They got a bomb-sniffing dog, or multiple apparently, going through the courthouse, making sure that there is, I don't know how many bomb-sniffing dogs, but making sure there's no bombs. And then the guy shows up and just says, fifth, 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 fifth. That's what we're dealing with. Lindsey Graham. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham is a vocal Trump supporter, except those couple of days when he thought there might be consequences for a coup. But when he testified before the grand jury, the South Carolina Republican sounded skeptical of former president's claims of election fraud. According to one of the grand jurors, Graham said that after the election, if somebody had told Trump that aliens came down and stole Trump ballots, that Trump would have believed it. Graham said that after the election, if somebody had told Trump that aliens came down and stole Trump ballots, Trump would have believed it. That is what we're dealing with. Trump did not care. We're laughing at, bamboo in the ballot boxes. Of course, they are grabbing onto anything they can. Truth is not important to these people. Graham's office did not respond to a request for comment. Law lesson. Jurors revealed that the first witness they heard from was Bo Rutledge, a dean of the former University of Georgia Law School. Rutledge, who appeared under subpoena, explained presidential election law and repeatedly told jurors he was nervous because he didn't want to make mistakes. Rutledge was an interesting choice for Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis, a Democrat. He once clerked for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, among the most conservative members of the High Court. Jurors said they found Rutledge's presentation, in which he explained the legal process after ballots have been cast, highly instructive. Okay, second thoughts. Let me go down to our last section here. Trump was not subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury, nor was he invited to testify voluntarily. Jurors suggested the decision was not made by prosecutors. Jurors suggested the decision was made by prosecutors, not them. Some reasoned that he would likely have invoked the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, as he did repeatedly when he was deposed by the New York Attorney General. But one juror said that, in hindsight, he wished that jurors had requested Trump's testimony, especially after Manhattan prosecutors moved to do so in a separate criminal investigation into the 45th president of the United States. We are living in a historic era. We're going to go over to Midas Touch here and listen to their breakdown of it. To you right now, I just want to stress that this is every bit as crazy as it sounds. Like, it's easy. It's so easy to think, like, are we just getting swept up in a media storm? Is this not as big a deal? I feel like I've been hearing a lot about this. Yeah, that's the effect not seeing punishment for obvious crimes has. But this is sounding more and more, all of these are sounding more and more like mob cases, complete with the consequences for getting it wrong, which is actual harm to people. Let's listen to Midas Touch. They have an excellent breakdown.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, I want to direct your attention to a few stunning new quotes from the jurors in the Georgia case, the Fulton County case against Donald Trump, and that was...
God help me. I said Midas Touch like a dozen times. It's not Midas Touch. It's The Legal Breakdown with Brian Tyler Cohen and Glenn Kirshner. I love both these cats. I don't know why I attributed that to Midas Touch. Anyway, yes, this is The Legal Breakdown.
In the Georgia Journal-Constitution, one juror said, quote, "I tell my wife, if every person in America knew every single word of information that we know, this country would not be divided as it is right now." And finally, here's the kicker here. A lot's going to come out sooner or later, and it's going to be massive. It's going to be massive. In your professional opinion, is this the kind of language used if an exoneration is in the works?
Yeah, I think it unlikely the jurors were talking about a massive exoneration of Donald Trump because the grand jury believes he's done nothing wrong. Right. I'll tell you, this is both really ominous for Trump and his criminal associates, and it's also a really good read. I hope everybody will read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution article, because rarely do you get this kind of insight into what was going on in the grand jury. I, as a prosecutor, got to see the inside of the grand jury all the time, but rarely does the general public get to see it. And when these grand jurors are talking about just how powerful the evidence is, how upsetting the evidence is, multiple grand jurors said they would sit in their cars at the end of the day and cry. Why would they cry? Because of what some of these people who were being investigated, presumably Trump and company, were doing to everyday citizens, to people like Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, the election workers in Georgia, who were not only vilified, but they had their lives threatened because Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani lied about them, claiming they're, stealing Trump votes, which was absolutely absurd. I mean, you could tell by reading this really deep dive piece that these grand jurors, took their work deadly seriously. They were really, I think, impacted by what they were seeing. And, there's another quote in the article that they said, it was incredibly important to us to get this right. And when they close out the article with one of the grand jurors saying, what's about to come is going to be massive, it's going to be massive, I'm starting to believe, Brian, that we're likely to see a big old RICO conspiracy indictment, not just sort of a series of more discrete standalone indictments of individuals. I think that's reinforced by what we heard from the forewoman, Emily Kors, when she said, look, you can expect to see more than a dozen people charged in this case. So I think we're going to see a big old conspiracy indictment issued by the grand jury after Fani Willis is done her work.
Yeah, and just to build on what you said earlier about Shay Moss and the whole issue with the elections workers, that part, I remember that was the one part of the hearings that really just kind of broke my heart, because these are just people who are not only haven't done anything wrong, but actually are doing their civic duty, are making our elections run. And just for the crime of being there, it really is amazing to see what Donald Trump and the rest of his acolytes, like what they will torch in their quest to just gain power, and who.
I am so glad.
Whose lives they will just
phrase it a little better. I am so glad that that he brought up that fact. That he brought up the fact that these people they're not just regular folks. I mean, they are regular folks, but they're not only that. They're doing work for us, for our benefit. I don't want to go sit all day in an election voting booth. I want to spend as little time in my day voting as possible. I'm a lazy man. I am very appreciative of the fact I want to vote right. I certainly do want to get my vote in, but I'm lazy. And I'm appreciative of the fact that there is always a group of folks there who volunteered their time to go and run this stuff. That's all they were doing. In exchange for that, for daring to be helpful human beings, for daring to be involved, they became targets of dangerous threats by Donald Trump. Donald Trump has put their lives in danger. It's got to be dealt with. At every level, we got to go after this guy, and we need to remember not to forget that one. Not that one. Because that's the least American thing I've ever heard.
One roughshod over, and how many just completely innocent people's lives were turned upside down just for this fairy tale that he was trying to concoct with the help of these people who just don't have any scruples, any shame, and who deserve everything that's coming to them. Glenn, there was one other quote that I just want to reiterate here, and that is, if everyone knew every word of information that we know, this country wouldn't be so divided. Now, that line from a juror in the Georgia case suggests that one of the two sides of the political spectrum is being lied to. I don't think that we have to sit here and pretend to not know which side that is. What were your thoughts on that line in particular?
Yeah, it was a very telling line. And I think what the grand jury was communicating is there's the truth, and they got a whole lot of evidence that was truthful and honest and accurate. And then there were a bunch of lies. And they actually put the witnesses that they saw in three batches. They put the truth telling witnesses, they put a second category of witnesses who really didn't want to be there. They needed a subpoena to compel their testimony. But once they got there, they told the truth, even if reluctantly. And then the third batch were the people who were most closely aligned to Donald Trump, who were unwilling to tell the truth or who would just invoke their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination.
That was such a smart move on their part. Don't jumble up the liars and the truth tellers so you have to remember in your head the individual person. No, put them all in one group and then put all the next in another, so on and so forth, so the jurors only have to remember the day. I think that's quite good.
It's pretty clear that the grand jurors were kind of signaling that if everybody could just see the truth and see the lies, then maybe, that would move the needle. Maybe there would only be one view of what really happened. Now, I would hasten to add that might be a little naive because there are probably some hardcore Trump supporters who are never going to be moved by the truth. But I thought it was a pretty telling comment by the grand juror.
And just one more point on this. You'd mentioned that it was so surprising that we're getting this kind of insight, from out a 30,000-foot view, that we're getting this kind of insight into the grand jury. Why are we getting this insight? Why is this something that we wouldn't normally see, and yet why are we getting this insight now?
So most jurisdictions have rules, and those rules involve grand jurors not being permitted to ever talk about what went on inside the grand jury unless there was a special order from the judge permitting them to speak. In Georgia, the rules are very different. In Georgia, you can speak about anything that happened inside the grand jury. The only thing you cannot discuss publicly are your deliberations, when it's just the grand jurors privately discussing what the evidence means, who should be indicted, but everything else is fair game. Who testified, what they said. And it's funny because the judge also made clear that they could talk about their recommendations in their report. Interestingly, none of the grand jurors who have given interviews to the media has been willing to talk about precisely what's in the report or who they recommended should be indicted. So they're kind of editing themselves and actually holding back, not necessarily disclosing everything. Under the rules of Georgia, they're permitted to disclose.
Yeah, and I guess we don't really have to. We already know that Fani Willis is releasing her decision about whether or not to indict imminently. So I guess at this point, it really doesn't matter because we'll find out that information soon enough. But it is important to note that they have stayed within the confines of the rules that are being imposed on them. Not to bury the lead here, there is another case that is racing toward indictment. That's the Manhattan District Attorney case.
I do think that's worthy of listening to. I've included the link to the full legal breakdown in the description. I'm going to move on from that, though, for now, because this is really about the effect the Georgia investigation has had. Let's talk about what we can do. It is perhaps the most commonly recommended thing on this channel to do. Keep up the pressure. Contact the Department of Justice. Let them know that you see him. You see what Trump has done. You expect indictments. There's a general contact link in the description. I want to point out, think about all we know as a result of the Georgia investigation. Think about all we know as a result of the New York investigations. Think about all we know as a result of the state-level investigations. A ton. Think about what we would know if all we had were the federal investigations. We would have some talk about documents by Jack Smith. Really by Merrick Garland via Jack Smith, which could be easily compared to the other investigations. Thank you very much, timer. Which could be easily compared to the other investigations into documents that other former White House workers had. We'd have bupkis, in other words. Yes, they may eventually even get a conviction. But it's been made crystal clear that the state investigations are where progress gets made. It's where the tone is set. It's where accountability is going to happen. Take advantage of that. If you are in Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, let's see if I can do it all before I get there. I didn't. Arizona. Or Arizona. Oh, I was so close. If you're in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, that means right now your state could open a state-level investigation into the 2020 fake electors, just like Michigan did. Similar to what Georgia's doing. We could have, in other words, 2.5 times the amount of pressure added. Get it started. Contact. I've provided a link, if you're in one of those states, to every one of those attorney generals. You can just click on that link and directly go to their contact page and tell them, if you want, you can just include the script that I've provided. AG Merrick Garland has had years to put together a case against those who tried to deny my vote in 2020, yet he let the 2022 election pass without filing charges. He has been unwilling or unable to hold accountable those who were responsible for the fake elector plot. As your constituent, I want you to protect my vote by opening a state investigation into the fake elector plot. You can just copy and paste that if you want, but the point is we need to put as much pressure on the Department of Justice at all levels as we can to get Trump indicted, if indeed it turns out that he was the one arranging for people to do this. It does appear that that's the case from all the public has seen. The January 6th committee seems to think that's the case. There's no reason that our state attorney generals shouldn't open state investigations. The hell of an opening segment. Let's look at the comments.